problems are. So I guess maybe if we could flip it a little bit, how would you diagnose what the problem is? What do you, from your point of view, do you view it as out of control costs, private insurance markets? What do you diagnose as the problem with healthcare costs right now?
Well, the problem is that we started by not taking Medicaid expansion. So what Governor Walker did was put even more people, even more vulnerable people, at risk in the state of Wisconsin. So I said on my very first day as a candidate, I would have accepted that expansion. All right? That's number one. There's no question that we have an issue with cost. So if you look at what's going on with Obamacare, folks, I have Crohn's disease.
So
I was diagnosed.
Yep.
I don't want to say great, but you understand where I'm coming from.
I know it, yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I have Crohn's disease. I was diagnosed in my early 20s, and sounds like you were as well. All right, so I've been listing that pre-existing condition for basically almost my entire life. Mm-hmm. My entire family is on Obamacare. I get what the real fear is in the room, in the state, and around the country of people who are at risk of losing their health care. That is not going to happen on my watch. That's not equivocation. That's where I'm coming from, period. So when you think about what are the issues, well, the Republicans want to blow up ACA, right?
Yeah.
I don't think you take a bulldozer to something when you could use a shovel. There are definitely things that have to be improved. There are ways to provide greater access at reduced costs by going through the problem solving that I'm talking about. But to suggest that there's an instant answer to providing that solution, I think is creating something that appears to be overly simplified. There's way more that goes into it than that. Yes, sir.
Maybe we'll do two more questions.
Okay.
Since the founding of our country, there's been a constantly evolving definition or concept of public education. Mike, this is a career too. When we started out, there was no concept of public education, and there was elementary for males, and then females, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me one of the best job development and educational things that we could be doing now is to expand the concept of public education and extend it through grade 14. And have free public education for everyone through that, which I think would have some of the work issues and the education. I'm curious as to what your stand would be with respect to expanding public education from grade 12 to grade 14.
That's actually not an issue that I've given any consideration to. I'm not saying that it's not a valid idea. I'm not saying it's something that shouldn't be looked into and considered. I'm telling you that I haven't looked at that particular issue myself, and I don't feel prepared to discuss it. This I will tell you, I think when we look at public education, we have to think about public education in a different way. I talked earlier about having that kid in the middle of the room and making that individual the most important person in the room. I think you surround them beginning with early childhood education, with great teachers, with mentorship programs from other kids in the classroom that can help kids to succeed, by making sure you're connected to communities and to other businesses and to technology in very real terms. I think you look at education in ways that you have virtual internships, for example. Let's say you want some kid like me to understand, why am I taking geometry? Why am I taking calculus? Where are these things actually going to come into play? Well, what if we began coordinating with companies all over the state of Wisconsin that could provide the kinds of internship programs and real-life challenges that you face in businesses around the state, so that some kid has a real idea of what they're going to do with this knowledge that they're acquiring. I wasn't that kid in high school. I didn't know why some of the things I was learning I needed to learn. Mm-hmm. I ultimately figured that out when I got to college. But let's make learning in the state of Wisconsin experiential. Let's create the kinds of connections that ultimately ensure success, whether or not kids decide to go on to a 2-year college, which I know they're working hard to get rid of right now, which is crazy. If you look at our tech schools, or a 4-year university, there's a lot of ways to create the kind of success that can be created by thinking outside the box in our state. Yes, sir.
You mentioned energy earlier. Since Walker came into office, importing of coal and burning of coal has gone up 6%. We have solar potential in Wisconsin that exceeds Germany, which on a sunny June day produces 50% of their energy from solar. I want to know what your energy plan is for Wisconsin.
Well, I'd like to lead the world in renewable energy, in the development of renewable energy technologies and the use of those technologies in the state of Wisconsin. So whether it's solar or wind, and I'll tell you about another idea that I threw out there because, listen, we're the dairy state, right? There's a lot of issues right now with what are we doing with all that poop, right? Cow manure, all over the state, big issue. It's not just a big issue for the state of Wisconsin, it's a big issue, period. So what if we resolve that issue in the state by being innovative and looking at that problem in a different way? So one of the ideas that I threw out there is this. We have a lot of big producers right now that are taking a lot of heat because of the disposal of that manure. What if we actually had, instead of
producer.
what if we actually, hang on a second, wait for it, okay? Instead of asking people who are milking cows to also be running combustion engines and making power, that doesn't seem like something I would ask a dairy producer to do. What if we regionalize power plants? We put a pipeline in for major producers. We actually created power in a serious way that was regionalized and powered communities throughout the state of Wisconsin by having localized digesters, by taking some of that stream and that gas, refining those gases into fuels that can be used for farm vehicles, taking the nitrogen stream and prilling ammonium nitrate prills for fertilizer that can be sold throughout our state and throughout the country, by localizing bagging operations for organic fertilizers, for which there is a national demand right now. What if we looked at that problem differently? Because when you do that, you take the pressure off of land acquisition, right? You can also be purifying the water that's used in farming operations and reusing that for irrigation. So instead of putting and spraying manure on a lot of these lands, we could actually be using some of the waters that were reclaimed and put on those same fields. It resolves a lot of problems for a state that's a dairy state that wants to continue to grow small, medium, and large businesses that employ families throughout our state. Because when we look at problems differently, we start to attract families back into small communities that are dying. Those families not only are the workers of today's in those plants, but they're the succession plan for families that have nowhere to go with businesses that they've been running in rural parts of our state for their whole lives. Now there's a way that people can actually own a small business, start a small business. Those small businesses can be supported in real terms so that it's easier for small business owners to grow. Right now we have an incentive plan for large corporations. Rather than trying to understand how do we grow our entire state, we do it holistically. We do it respecting our environment. We do it perfecting the kinds of technologies that put Wisconsin on the map on a global basis so that we're not only solving real issues in Wisconsin, but we're solving real issues all over the world. That's the kind of thinking that an outsider brings to the table. That's the kind of vision that is real for the state of Wisconsin that builds on our strengths. That's why I'm here, and that's what we can do, and that's why I want to be your governor. Thank you.